Our guest speaker this afternoon is His Excellency Mark Brown, the Prime Minister of Cook Island. But as you know, a lot of head of states right now are running behind. So with your indulgence, we will start, and once Prime Minister Brown join, he will join actually the panel. Knowing him pretty well, I do not think he will mind about it. The, so the on my side, on my right, I'm extremely pleased to have Elmira from UNEP, somebody with whom, yeah, unless IPCC, sorry, Elmira, Deputy Director of IPCC, somebody with whom I've worked when you were in UNEP and in UNDP. And so it's a great pleasure to have you. Maybe I will let all panelists make a short introduction of themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Elmira Fida. I am the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Oops.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ezra Christopher. I'm from the Department of Environment in Antigua and Barbuda. I serve there as a monitoring and evaluation officer. I'm also the Deputy Coordinator for Readiness and Enabling Activities Program.
So once again, many thanks for joining this event. The objective is to share some of the lessons learned from the implementation of GCF adaptation project. But first, why did we decide to have adaptation as one of our key topics during this high-level segment? The increase in average global temperature is happening faster than expected. When we signed the Paris Agreement in 2015, the likelihood that we will cross the 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next 5 years was 0%. Today, the likelihood that we are to cross the 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next, at least 1 year, within the next 5 years, is 50%. So we are very likely to experience a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in average global temperature against pre-industrial time. Why is this 1.5 degrees Celsius important? During the Holocene, this period that has seen the emergence of agriculture, we have never ever gone beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. We have no clue about how our farming system will react to 1.5 degrees Celsius. In addition, we might cross the 2 degrees Celsius as early as 2045 to 2060. 2 degrees Celsius, our species, the Homo sapiens and its antecessors, have never experienced it. For the past 2.5 million years, the ice ages, we have seen between -6 during the ice age to +2 degrees Celsius, -6 to +2. So crossing the 1.5 degrees Celsius will have implication. If we were to cross the 2 degrees Celsius, it will have also very severe implication. Today, we're in a situation where it's not only about scaling up mitigation, we have also to scale up adaptation at the same time. Today, we have to pay as much attention to mitigation to avoid the unmanageable than to adaptation to manage the unavoidable. And so, no, if there is one thing why the increase in average global temperature is happening faster than expected, there is one thing that is not happening faster than expected. I guess all of you can venture a guess about it. Finance. Finance is definitely not happening. Depending on various estimates, it's between $3 to $7 trillion a year that we will have to shift from our existing socio-economic system to a net zero climate resilient economic system in order to avert catastrophic climate change. The total financing in 2019-2020, according to CEPI, was 632 billion. So basically a fifth to a tenth of what we need. And adaptation was only 46 billion dollars of that. Here again, at least a fifth to a tenth of what we need. So we have a major financing gap. Out of this 46 billion dollars for adaptation, 98% comes from the public sector. The private sector accounts for only 2%, less than $1 billion. It's basically more or less what GCF has been programming in adaptation every year over the past 2 years. So we have a major financing problem. In order for us to catalyze finance at scale, we will have to basically explore new form of what we call blended finance, new form of public-private partnership, where we use a tiny little amount of public money to shift much, much larger financial flows. Right now, it's fair to say that blended finance works mostly for mature technologies in mature economies, not so much for adaptation in nascent markets. So we need to find new type of instrument, new approaches. And GCF, the core work of GCF today is very much to explore this new form of blended finance. And our mandate is to accelerate climate innovation and investment. And for that, we have adopted a four-pronged approach. The first prong is basically to support transformative planning, such as, for example, overlaying the maps of all the infrastructure and the map of hazards to identify what kind of infrastructure cannot go offline and what is the best mix of gray and green infrastructure to protect them, and what are the best public policy instruments, policy de-risking, financial de-risking, to catalyze finance. So that is our first prong, reinventing planning. We will have to plan in a completely different manner. The second prong is innovation. When it comes to adaptation, maybe the bulk of the new business model, financial model, technologies that we will need is yet in the brain of climate innovators. One thing we know for sure is that this business model will not come from the north to the global north to the global south. Because most of the technologies, most of the business model needed today in emerging markets do not make sense in OECD countries. So there will be no investment in this kind of innovation. So the innovation has to come from emerging market. The problem in emerging market is that for climate innovators, it's very difficult to get support to refine your business model. It's very difficult to get access to early growth finance to ground-proof your approach. And so the second prong of GCF is very much about supporting climate innovators by establishing incubators and accelerators, and also developing new form of early growth mechanism. Let me maybe give you one example. We decided to support a $400 million private equity fund called CRAF for innovative adaptation technologies. Innovative adaptation technologies is not what institutional investors are used to go for. And therefore, we decided to provide $100 million of first loss equity to reassure other institutional investors. If anything goes wrong, we will be losing our money. If everything goes right, we will get back our investment. And in addition, we will enable hundreds of innovators in emerging markets to have a fighting chance. Afterwards, once we have a new climate solution, our third prong is to basically de-risk the first commercialization, the first application at commercial scale of a new climate solution. And this is very important because that's a precondition often for a banker to lend. Banker can manage risk, they can price risk, they cannot manage uncertainty. So the first project is often critical to establish a market. And and for example, for us, the adaptation of the Saharan region was extremely important. Over the past 3 years, we have been supporting 59 projects for up to $2.2 billion to promote a bioeconomy, and from time to time providing concessional debts for access to energy, or guarantees, or equities, or grant. And but every time trying to come with a an application at commercial scale. And the fourth prong for us is to basically strengthen the capacity of domestic financial institutions to incorporate climate risk in their appraisal methodology, be able to look at the total return of a climate resilient infrastructure adaptation initiative, and access capital market to finance them. And so, for example, in Mongolia, we did help the government of Mongolia to establish a green bank specialized in this kind of projects. So that's the overall approach of GCF to try to catalyze finance for adaptation at scale. So now I would like to give the floor to the different panelists to basically share maybe your experience, and maybe we'll start with Barbados, if you're okay, because in Antigua and Barbuda, because in Antigua and Barbuda we had some of our first adaptation projects.
Thank you so much. I just want to first give an overview of the climate change context in Antigua and Barbuda. Antigua and Barbuda is extremely vulnerable to projected climate change impacts. We face a high intensity hurricanes. We definitely face more Cat 4 hurricanes, and most recently, we face Cat 5 plus hurricanes. So we're more exposed to frequent droughts as well as higher temperatures, and we do experience sea level rise. About 100% of our population are also exposed to two or more hazards, environmental hazards, based on their location. So Antigua is a very small island developing state. It has a small population, projected upwards to 100,000 or so. And because of our limited resources, we do face constraints in terms of investing in adaptation. We also do face a high public debt burden. And because of the climate events that we do face almost yearly, this caused our situation to worsen. I would say the relationship that we have started with GCF has been very helpful and very fruitful to us. GCF currently is supporting Antigua in promoting implementation of cost-effective adaptation measures. We are an accredited entity to GCF as of 2017. As such, we have developed quite a number of projects with GCF. We have two ongoing projects right now: an enhanced direct access project that is a regional project that's focused on Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, as well as Grenada. We do have another project which looks at enhancing adaptation in the building sector. This is one of our most recently approved projects, and that was over 32 million, I believe, in grant funding from the GCF. Our enhanced direct access project was over 20 million. So far, as I mentioned, that we've had a long-standing relationship with GCF. We've also, over the years, have at least 5 readiness projects with GCF. Our 5th readiness project was approved last year, and that will be a multi-year program with GCF, and that will help us in pursuing implementation of our NDCs, as well as upscaling quite a number of projects. We do plan to develop 5 more projects with GCF focused on the water sector, the energy sector, the road sector, as well as introducing a just transition project to help our workforce transition as we embark on a new energy transition process. Over to you.
Many, many thanks. It's I had the opportunity to see at least one of these projects in Antigua last last April, and it's a beautiful country and with some very interesting climate initiatives.
Thank you so much for that. I believe you may have seen our Enhanced Direct Access project. So that particular project is pushing locally led adaptation. We do have a component focused on providing revolving loans to poorer households, more focused on single female-headed households in a vulnerable community that is often inundated with flooding events. We do also provide grant funding to community-based organizations so that they can equip their facilities as shelters to help adapt against climate change.
Yeah, it was the expanded direct access opportunity. So it's a bit of a jargon, but it's a very interesting modality. GCF is de facto the first dedicated climate IFI. And we are capital agnostic. We are a provider of risk-patient capital. And I would say we are at our best for projects of $250 million. And but if you need $250,000, you have basically the due diligence that has been put in place for a project of $250 million. And there we are not at our best. So expanded direct access, the idea was to try to decentralize the decision making. Rather than going for 100 grant of $250,000, to go for a project of $25 million and to entrust our partners to basically decide the best allocation. And we were extremely impressed by the achievement of Antigua and Barbuda. And we have reproduced this approach for the Federal State of Micronesia and Vanuatu. So your success is now benefiting a number of countries facing a similar situation. Now, going to the IPCC, our scientific reference for all.
I need to get the presentation.
Maybe it's such a case. We start with Mongolia while we fix up the ambassador. I understand that you have just been deputized. I think all of us must have been deputized on a couple of occasions. If you have not yet been deputized, you will be before the end of COP. It's part of the game of deputizing. So I very much appreciate the fact that you have accepted to deputize for your minister, and we'd like to give you the floor to describe the experience of Mongolia in terms of adaptation. One of the largest program in the world per capita for GCF is in Mongolia. And my mic.
Sorry. Again, my name is Pak Jargar. First of all, I would like to express my thanks, as I speak in Mongolia, for invitation of Madam Ms. Foreign Affairs, Ms. Patistic, to attend this very important event and make some intervention. But unfortunately, or not unfortunately, the head of delegation, the Miss President, have a very important political meeting, and he asked her to join to this meeting, and she authorized me, as you said, deputized me to make intervention on her behalf, and in order to avoid any loss of words, I would like to read text she prepared, if you allow me. Your Excellency, Mr. Yannick Glemarik, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to the Green Climate Fund for organizing this very important event. Climate change is the most significant challenge of our time to achieving sustainable development. Mongolia is one of the countries most affected by climate change, and we are well focused on working together to lessen the effects of climate change and other negative human impacts on the planet. Mongolia attaches high importance to efficient cooperation with the GCF, supporting socio-economic development through environmental sustainability. As we know, the climate change adaptation measures require not only significant financial support, but also skilled manpower and adequate technology. Currently, the strong financial mechanisms such as the Global Environmental Facility, the Green Climate Fund, and the Adaptation Fund, and other international financial institutions have been provided the support for the most vulnerable countries to climate change for addressing the adaptation-related issues. As the best example of our cooperation between Mongolia and GCF, I would like to point out the project entitled Improving Adaptive Capacity and Risk Management of Rural Communities in Mongolia, funded by the Green Climate Fund in partnership with the UNDP. The GCF has granted the financing of $23 million and mobilized further co-financing mobilized $79 million. The project is expected to benefit about 1/4 of the population of the country. The objective of the project is to strengthen the climate resilience of resource-dependent rural populations through feasible adaptation measures for maintaining ecosystem services. All adaptation measures included in this project are based on modern know-how and traditional technologies upgraded with a number of innovative elements. As part of the acceleration of the adaptation of innovation and investment, the GCF has been supporting us in developing a national adaptation plan, which is instrumental in adopting long-term, country-driven approach to adapt to climate change. Engaging private sector and the banking system in financing of climate adaptation and mitigation, the government of Mongolia strives to implement the project on green finance with the GCF and the Mongolian Banking Association, what about Jan just mentioned. What we really appreciate GCF, what is unique about GCF, it's integrated, holistic approach to, for working with developing countries like Mongolia. GCF goes beyond just financing mitigation and adaptation projects. It brings support for capacity building, helps with the integrating planning, with developing feasible projects, works with us on innovative solutions and technologies. A great appreciation again for that, and I think not only the Minister think, me and all of Mongolian delegations think, thank for that very important for Mongolia exercise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much for this kind word. Thank you very much for accepting to deputize. It's you did a great job. I think it's it's my great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mark Brown, Prime Minister of Cook Island. Mark, I'm afraid the floor is immediately yours.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. Sorry I was a little late. I was held at another event, but it's to be here. I just really wanted to talk about adaptation. Adaptation for us is about buying time. G20 countries are responsible for 80% of emissions. Our emissions for our part of the world in the Pacific represent a matchstick in a forest. So for us, adaptation measures are really, really important. And okay, oh, that's better. So the release of adaptation funds for us needs to be accelerated. Adaptation funds need to be disentangled from conditionalities of debt, conditionalities that we see on a return on investment on adaptation measures. They need to be untied from things such as financial management reform, which are a condition of some providers of funding in order for countries to have them. These are measures that make the release of adaptation funds slow, difficult, and they delay the need of countries where adaptation measures are critically important. I've been a Minister of Finance in our country now for 12 years, and during that time we lifted the prosperity levels, the GDP levels of our country to graduate to developed nation status under the OECD criteria. We graduated on the 1st of January 2020. 3 months later, the global airline industry shut down with COVID, and 2 years later, we've lost 25% of our GDP. So the point here being that vulnerability is also an important factor that countries like us need to take into account. Vulnerability is exposed by COVID for economies that are very narrowly based, and in our case, based upon tourism, but also countries that are exposed to risks such as a hurricane, of which one hurricane can have a similar impact of 20 to 30% destruction of your GDP, which may be 10 years worth of prosperity that you've built up. We saw last month the Hurricane Ian in Florida. The 48 hours that people had notice to evacuate allowed thousands of people to leave the at-risk area. For countries like ours, there's nowhere to evacuate. You're on an island, hurricane is coming. You have to build resilience to withstand what we see now are much stronger impacts of hurricane, much increased frequency of this type of bad weather. So for us, the investment in resilience and adaptation measures, hurricane shelters are critically important. When we look at the scale of funding that is being that is wanted or needed for the GCF, $100 billion a year, we generally fall below those high numbers because of the diseconomies of scale that deal with us. So what we would like to see as well is that the process for analyzing proposals for financing need to be broken up. You just simply cannot have the same processes for a multi-billion-dollar project proposal, the same as for community-based project proposals that do the same thing in building resilience. There needs to be a difference in how these processes are undertaken. But there will come a point where, as mentioned previously by the likes of Undersecretary Kerry, mentioned today by the President of Egypt in his address, where adaptation will not do. We'll get to a stage where you cannot adapt your way out of the impacts of climate change that are occurring now. So it was very pleasing to hear at my previous engagement that I was at, some very senior government leaders talking about things that we need to look at financing for climate measures in terms of longer term. So capital that needs to be made available to countries, if there are to borrow, need to be at terms, not of normal banking terms of 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, but 20 years, 40 years, 100 years. We need to look at things, what may be seen today as radical terms and conditionalities of borrowing, these are actually now necessities that we need to consider as we face the increasing apocalyptic projections that we're going to be expecting from the impacts of climate change. We've been pushing since COVID, where we had to take on more debt to protect our economies, for a cap on debt servicing, something that our MDBs have been very reluctant to pursue. So again, it was very encouraging to hear. In fact, my country, with the debt that we've taken on, expect to have debt servicing at very critical levels over the next 5 to 7 years. We have now just taken out a special policy-based loan, a new product, which will assist us in servicing our debt requirements in the next 5 to 7 years. So taking out a loan to cover another loan, that's not going to be very sustainable as it keeps getting into a vicious cycle. So we need to look at other measures and need to introduce new measures which may be seen to be radical, but which, if we look back in history, have not been radical. There have been major world events such as World War II, where the rebuild of Germany was undertaken with significant support from world countries over long periods of time to enable the regrowth. Right now, I think it is going to be important for us to look at innovative ways of financing to help vulnerable countries at risk. We need to be able to distinguish between larger countries at risk, the likes of our emerging economies, Pakistan, Indonesia, in Asia, where the numbers of people are counted in the hundreds of millions, as opposed to countries like ours, where the numbers of our population are counted in the thousands. So there are distinct differences on what our demands would be, as opposed to what other countries' demands will be, and being able to identify and tailor the solutions to suit each of our countries is really what we're going to need, not a one system or one process fits all. Thank you very much, Yannick. I think with those words just walking in, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. For what is worth, I fully support and endorse every single of your statement. We will now come to the last presentation of this event on adaptation, with a PowerPoint presentation from Emira from the IPCC. So I'm afraid I will have to ask the panelists to move to the front row.
Okay. Thanks again for inviting me to this event, giving me the opportunity to present the key findings from the latest IPCC reports. But before starting, I just wanted to say a few words for IPCC. And maybe for the newcomers, my name is Elmira Fida. I'm the Deputy Executive Secretary of IPCC. And I'm going to summarize here today thousands of pages that have been produced and delivered by an army of authors who are volunteering their time in IPCC. IPCC stands for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a UN body. It's governed by all member states, members of the United Nations. And it is important for this audience here to understand that IPCC makes an assessment. It doesn't undertake its own studies, but they assess the studies that have been undertaken by peer authors and undergo peer-reviewed literature. IPCC has delivered in the current cycle, and by the way, IPCC has gone through 6 cycles. One cycle lasts for an approximately 6 to 7 years. IPCC is at the end of the 6th cycle, and currently has produced, in the course of the last 1.5 years, the IPCC authors have managed to deliver the 3 installments, the 3 pieces of the 6th assessment report. This is one of the those slides that we use to start the story that we tell, which unfortunately is not a good one. It tells that the world has been warmed by 1.1 degree, and almost 99% of that is coming from human activities, and in particular from burning fossil fuels. So that is the situation where we stand, and that's a reality check that we make every time that we make or undertake an assessment every cycle. The scale of the changes, the scale and the magnitude of the change that this 1.1 degree has brought to the world is unprecedented, and you can see in this slide, which summarizes changes in sea level rise, Arctic sea ice area, and glacier retreats, which in fact are correlated with the CO2 concentration. And that has been something that, again, adds to this very sobering and troubling picture that we show from the report. And one of the findings of the report on that regard is that all these changes are irreversible. Even if we are to change emissions like today or tomorrow, it is impossible to go back to the sea level that it was before pre-industrial era. The same applies to Arctic sea ice area and glaciers. Next slide, please. Global warming has caused a lot of dangerous and disruptions in nature. This picture shows a massive disruption in one of the big forests in California. But in our report, we have quite a few other examples that add again to this very sobering picture that we show and we develop through our report. Next slide, please. Again, adding to this picture, the losses and damages that are caused by storms, hurricanes, and other climate hazards is one of the features that no one would like to hear, but unfortunately it's part of the bad news that we share. Going to the cities where 50% of the population is living is another area or hotspot from the reports that we have developed, which basically shows that they are the center where climate impacts are hitting the population of these areas the most. And these are then combined with other challenges and factors such as air pollution and health of the people, which come up with combined impacts to the world's population, which at the end come up with a bill that shows the cost of having 3.3 to 3.6 billion of people locked in a severe poverty, to which climate change is contributing the most. These hotspots are, unsurprisingly, shared across the world, and the list starts with Africa, East Asia, Central and South America, Arctic and Pacific region. Extreme weather events do not necessarily happen in our nation. Get combined. This slide shows how an increased heat and drought affects the work of the farmers, the way that they reduce crop yields, productivity, affecting increased food prices, reducing household incomes, and in the macro level, coming up with impact on local effects and potentially global effects. In our recent assessment report, the one on adaptation, ability and impact, authors have come up with a new understanding or concept of understanding of interconnections, which bring together climate change, biodiversity, ecosystems, and human society. And that is one of the most important findings, showing that there is no way that we can address climate change or sectors that it affects in silos. There is a need to come together with combined and integrated approaches that address these three sectors, which, if you might have also heard about the triple planetary crisis that colleagues in Human Environment are talking about, is applying on the same lines. The next one, please. Speaking of the challenges, climate change combines also unsustainable, decades of unsustainable natural resources, habitat destruction, growing urbanization, and inequity. And these challenges include limited access to water, sanitation and health, climate, high levels of poverty, weak leadership, lack of finance, and lack of accountability and trust in governments. Next slide, please. In our report, we have also started talking about the future. Can I have... Sorry, I need to change the... I'll keep both. In this slide, you can see looking to the future, you could see that. Looking to the future, you could see that from these two maps, you could see that every change, every degree of change, or even under degree of change, is going to affect everything on Earth. And in this case, it is about biodiversity loss presented in different warming levels. You could see the 1.5 and the 2 degree. Yeah, better. The next slide. Biodiversity loss at the different warming levels is something that has been observed pretty much from the authors, because it is about not just biodiversity, but it's about also ecosystem services, which at the end will also be affected in not even in the 1.5 degree level. Next slide, please. Biodiversity loss at the different warming levels, again, in the future, in a 3.5, the situation will be very severe, with a mass extinction of many species in terrestrial and also water ecosystems. This is a summary of the future global risks, which include heat stress, water scarcity, food security, and flood risk. Actually, I've been referring to this, so please, next slide. Unless there is an immediate, rapid, and large-scale reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 would be beyond reach. This is one of the most important findings of the first and the third Working Group 1 and Working Group 3 report, which is now materialized in the very detailed scenarios for each and every greenhouse gases, which shows, unfortunately, that CO2 emissions during the last decade have been the highest in the human history. That shows that, unfortunately, we are not on track to limit warming to 1.5 degree if there is no drastic and transformative action in cutting emissions, which is very recently also confirmed by the report, emission gap report, 22 emission gap report that has been launched by my colleagues in UN Environment a few days ago. Next slide, please. Action on adaptation has increased, but progress is uneven, and we are not adapting fast enough. So what is happening now? This is what the report starts talking about. So the story about adaptation starts when we all know what is going on and what is happening to our ecosystems, what is happening to the human beings and the society. Our report shows that there is some good news, and adaptation is happening around the world. Many countries have put in place policies, implementation plans. GCF is also contributing towards that. And it is very evident that nature is offering significant and untapped potential. In this picture, you could see a Nigerian farmer, rubber farmer, who is using, in fact, a combination and integration of fruit trees, bees, and crops. So basically, trying to survive, trying to adapt to the severe climate changes that have hit the region where he is living in. Next slide, please. There are options in the water sector, water management, options on farms that include irrigations, rainwater storage, water-saving techniques, moisture conservation in soils, economic and ecological benefits, and reduced vulnerability. Again, GCF is funding quite a lot of projects that are using these options. Our report shows that these options are also contributing toward larger benefits, such as securing drinking water, flood and drought risk management, and working with nature land use planning. Next slide, please. Food security or agriculture is another sector where options exist, and the GCF is also working. IPCC authors have assessed the feasibility of these options, and the list includes the stress-tolerant crops, agroforestry, farm lending, landscape diversification, community-based adaptation, and strengthening biodiversity. Again, these, if implemented properly, they are going to bring wider benefits such as food security, health, well-being, and livelihoods. I mentioned cities earlier on, and indeed, transforming cities is another package of adaptation options, knowing that by 2050, urban areas could be home to 2/3 of the world's population. And here is an area where there is a lot of need for not only reducing emissions, but also thinking of how we can best adapt in an integrated manner. And options, you can see the list here, starting from nature-based solutions, combining them with engineering or hard infrastructure approaches, establishing green and blue spaces, urban agriculture, and putting in place social safety nets for disaster management. Again, these are bringing wider benefits such as public health improvements because of the air pollution reduction and ecosystem conservation. But there are limits to adaptation. The world is going to move towards a scenario, hopefully.
Okay, and what are you saying?
1.5, but even in a 1.5.
So it's working when I
yeah, 1.5, as I have mentioned earlier, cannot prevent, all losses and damages.
It's the same.
Above 1.5, Some natural solutions may no longer exist. Above 1.5, there will be
This is the streaming. This is
water, disappearance, people living in small island states, and those depending on glaciers and snowmelt can no longer adapt. And the situation gets even worse if we go to 2 degrees and even higher, where these adaptation measures are questionable. Next one. What do we need to do to adapt? Again, in whatever scenario we're going to be heading to, adaptation finance is one of the things that is always the one that starts the list of the needs of the countries. And global finance, noting that the global finance flows are insufficient. Most financial targets emission. Most of the finance is targeting emission reduction projects rather than adaptation, and climate impacts can slow down the economic growth. So there is a need to get a larger share of the adaptation finance to allow countries, in particular countries in developing world, to adapt to climate change. It is important to think about not just finance, but how we can use finance for accelerating adaptation, and that requires a lot of efforts and investments in political commitment and follow-up through across all levels of the government, institutional framework set up with clear goals, priorities, and defined responsibilities.
Okay, so if you
enhancing knowledge
choose
and impacts that improve responses. Monitoring and evaluation of adaptation measures, which are also essential to track progress. It is very important to note that it is now time to think about moving from incremental adaptation
it's working.
to transformative
Maybe
adaptation
if you have
get ready to be
on your atom, you can
even a 1.5 or 2 degree
you can get
scenario.
lower because
The more we adapt, the higher the benefits will be. And you could see here a mapping of the contribution of adaptation options to SDGs, starting with the number 1 on poverty, the health one and well-being, number 3, reducing inequality, number 10, and also the one on land and below water, 14, 15. So every effort in adapting, not in a silo manner, but in an integrated manner, is going to contribute and bring in wider benefits, including on achieving sustainable development goals. I think I'm approaching the end of my presentation by also introducing here a concept of the resilient development, climate resilient development, which has to do with a green ball here in this graphic, which is the one that takes the world to a scenario where emission reductions are good enough to stay within a 1.5 2 degree. Adaptation is done in an integrated manner, in a transformative manner, and the sustainable development goals are achieved. This is the way and the path that the world is should be doing in order to stay within the safe level of warming. Worldwide action is more urgent than previously assessed. This is one of the key findings of the report, and I would like to close with a slide which summarizes, in fact, what I have been presenting so far. The prospects will become of climate change will become very limited if warming exceeds 1.5, and may not be possible if warming exceeds 2 degrees, and the time for action is only now. Thank you very much. I am sorry, maybe it took longer than expected, but it is, as I said, thousands of the pages of the reports that have been produced from hundreds of IPCC authors. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Many thanks, Samira. If I can ask the panel members to come back up. Sorry, I'm taking over the moderation from Yannick, who had to run off for another meeting. My name is Lilian Macharia, and I'm the Director of Portfolio Management at the Green Climate Fund. So as you've heard from Amira and from the different speakers, I think we are running out of time, and I think this is something that has been said enough times. Time for action in terms of adaptation is now. Some of the things that have been said, if you listen to Prime Minister Brown, and also from Yannick, financing is not keeping pace with the urgency that is there for climate action. And the financing needs to be provided in a manner that is very different from what has been done traditionally. It needs to be done in cognition of the needs of most of the developing countries and the vulnerabilities that these countries are facing. The other thing that we've also heard, I think, from the science side of it is that we need to take into account not just the fact that our vulnerability has its, adaptation has its limits. We need to adapt, take an integrated approach in terms of our adaptation measures so that we promote resilience. Can you hear me? Okay, all right. You're leaning forward, so I wasn't sure. Yes, so I think we need to take both into account vulnerabilities and also the fact that there are hotspots that require urgent action, and that perhaps we also need to be clear that adaptation itself, as I think Amir has said, has limits. 1.5 will not, it's not a safe level. We're talking, and we're not even on track to reach 1.5. So I think that's a really, really sobering warning for all of us. So I think I want to take this opportunity to first ask a few questions to the panelists, but I'll also invite you to also pose questions to the panelists on their thoughts. The first one, I think I'll start with Amira, who's just given us those very worrying figures and statistics. So Amira, where do you see us going? I mean, if you're saying that, we are not on track, adaptation is not, we can't solve all the actions. We can't solve the problem of climate and adaptation without the actions we are taking. Where do we start? And you're not getting enough financing. Where do you see us starting from? What is the action to start from?
Thank you, Lilian. I don't want to, to repeat what I said, but I think it's important to mention again the fact that whatever the scenarios, and hopefully we're going to be, if not 1.5, close to 1.5 and below 2 degree, again, there is, based on the laws of the chemistry and physics, 1.5 is possible. It is necessary to go for drastic emission reductions. This is one of the key messages that we say. Whatever the scenarios are going to be, we still need to adapt. So I think it is for the GCF, very important for GCF to note that countries need to adapt, and countries that need to adapt are those that are most vulnerable. I gave a picture of those that are in the highest need, the hotspots that are mentioned. We all know where the hotspots are. Start with the hotspots. Look at the gaps. There is a gap. UNEP also released the gap adaptation report. These gaps will increase with every increase of the warming. So actually, the way that we need to think about this is to think about climate resilient development, reduce emissions, build resilience, and do that in an interconnection with other sectors. No silos anymore. And I think this is the way to go. And of course, that requires finance, which I think hopefully GCF will get enough to make sure that it goes and is made available to countries. I hope I answered your question.
Safely in a way, because GCF requires finance also. It needs to be financed by some people, right? And then so that it's also able to deploy that finance to others. So the question then I'm going to ask is more for Ezra, because listening to Prime Minister Brown, he mentioned how even with countries that have made progress economically, that progress can be wiped out in one hurricane. And that becomes really difficult to recover, especially given the vulnerability he's mentioned, and the fact that also with the challenges that are increasing, the increasing adverse climate events, the countries are facing a lot more, challenges keeping up with, the cost of climate change. What would you say is needed to help countries such as yours? Antigua is one of them, to address the adaptation and resilience needs, and why do we start, and what is your appeal?
Thank you so much for that question. I would say that Antigua and Barbuda has been taking a very integrated approach. We do recognize where our vulnerabilities lie. We first sought to address some of those by pushing locally led adaptation. We've set up a national environmental fund called the Sustainable Island Framework Fund, or SURF Fund, where we do channel environmental and climate adaptation funding that we receive from the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the Global Environmental Facility. And so we channel those funds to support adaptation related projects and activities, as well as mitigation activities. And those are in line with our country's overarching national priorities. So this particular fund is a special fund that we use to provide revolving loans to particularly high risk groups that would not traditionally get an opportunity to access funding, to allow them to adapt to climate change and also to build their resilience. We also do, through the adaptation window of this fund, provide small scale grants to community groups to allow them to equip their facilities to become shelters, because we do face hurricanes almost on a yearly basis. And we do also face intense heat. So we are channeling those funds to community-based organizations and faith-based organizations to allow them to have facilities that will provide shelter and protection to more vulnerable groups. We do also provide funding for waterway management. One of the things that we do notice is that the communities that we're serving are impacted by flooding. So we do provide small-scale grants within those communities to those organizations serving those communities to help them adapt.
So thank you very much, Ezra. So, Special Envoy, Mongolia has done quite a lot in terms of even getting onto the green and also in adaptation. So from Mongolian experience, what do you think should be done in terms of helping countries get more onto the adaptation, in terms of supporting them, get onto the adaptation pathway and strengthen their resilience? What could you say from the Mongolian experience is the support required?
Yeah, thank you very much for this very important question, because Mongolia has some specifics. Because of course one of the coldest country in the world, and even some people believe that we don't need to fight against the global warming. global warming could be much better for Mongolia than other countries. And but in fact, of course, science says different. And yes, of course, almost we are talking when we are talking about climate change, we mostly focus on negative impact and so on. But of course, every natural process could have some positive impact. For example, more prolonged vegetation period and so on. But for the Mongolia, negative impact is more prevalent because more dry climate, and also not only because of climate change, but livelihood option in Mongolia. Mongolia is a nomadic society in the past, and the pasture-based livestock and the rain-fed crop production, fully depending on weather. If less rain, especially in those periods when we need more precipitation, and shift up for seasonal precipitation and so on now is because of climate change. And I think about resilience. You know why people sometimes ask why you succeed to have more projects from GCF and so on. But we first of all we a little bit more focus on science, and in order to avoid any maladaptation, to avoid any unnecessary the investment and so on, we first we check science base of possible scenario and so on. Secondly, we are co-benefit. Any type of mitigation project should have some co-benefit effect with adaptation, or some adaptation project should have also some degree of mitigation aspect. Third one is co-benefit. Mongolia is already not developing country and already very close to middle income country, and GCF said that if you ask $1 million, you should provide at least 2 or 3 million additional. And therefore, when we are, for example, asking 20 million, it means we need more co-finance and up to 50 million US dollar money. But it is not so easy because only we try to engage more private sector. Otherwise, public money is not enough for that. And the money should be addressed exactly what Mongolia needed to increase resilience. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think you've brought us to another point that I think Ada wanted us to end this session on, which, so to speak, is going to be my last question. Then I go to the audience. Is, you know, GCF is getting into its other second replenishment, and in this replenishment period, I think the question would be, what would you say is a forecast it should give to support countries on a global level, but also at the local level? Because one of the criticisms is sometimes that people don't feel the impact at the very local level. But it does need, as you say, then if you listen to the hotspots of 3.3 billion, it does require a global action. It's not going to just be a local action as well. So, Amira, what did you say is GCF should do in terms of adaptation, strengthening resilience, and helping countries, you know, be less vulnerable? What should it do in its second replenishment?
In an ideal scenario, GCF shouldn't speak just adaptation or mitigation. Every project should look at the possibilities of bringing these two components together, in my view, and also from my experience of engaging with GCF some years back as a authorized representative of UN Environment for GCF. So basically, again, looking at these hotspots, targeting this 3.3, 3.6 billion, I think this is a number where you have to start thinking even now before going into the next replenishment, and estimating looking at needs of the countries. There are estimates in our reports talking about what are the needs of the countries and how the finance of GCF could be used to leverage. You're not going to be getting billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that are needed by the countries. But GCF has been doing quite well in trying to get to leverage finance for both adaptation and mitigation. Do not forget that there are countries that do have to implement NDCs with the condition that they need to get finance. Don't forget that losses and damages are elements which cannot be avoided, and that the finance from GCF should also be orchestrated together with other sources of finance that come not necessarily or channeled through the GCF. This is a very quick advice that I would give to you.
Ezra?
Just to also add, at the local level, I would say we do tend to struggle in terms of getting the necessary data to support us to design projects that will help us access further funding. So that's one of the key struggles that we do see in Antigua and Barbuda and in other small island developing states. So one of the things that we have done is to try to access GCF funding to develop our data management, our data collection and management systems. So in that way, we can combine scientific knowledge on what are the risks that are facing certain communities and combine that with local knowledge. So we would be better positioned to have projects that target those communities and put them in a better pathway of adapting.
As you know, any adaptation activities are not cheap exercise. And therefore in Mongolia we have a little different approach. As you know, in modern days there is one very fashionable word, ecosystem-based approach, nature-based solution and so on. And when we're developing a national adaptation plan, we are trying to categorize in three groups. First is passive adaptation, which don't need any additional investment and so on. Just use traditional way of life and ecosystem, the performance and so on. Secondly, the active adaptation means a little bit more effort, need a little bit more money. The third one is proactive. It means already transformational change, already paradigm change and so on. And in that way, we are trying to minimize possible need of finance. Not just more money means good. In the contrary, to have capacity to use small amount of money to do something much more, it is very important. When in Mongolia, sometimes we said that to find money may be easy, than to spend this money more efficiently. And just we have such kind of approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. Okay, if there are no questions, you have a question?
Thank you very much to the panelists. It's been a very insightful session. My name is Hawa. I'm from Tanzania Agricultural Development Bank. I have a question to Lillian. That I think the reports are showing that there is significant need for financing to adapt and all the other various actions towards climate change. However, you made a statement that, as everyone is looking towards GCF, GCF is also looking at how it can, adequately have enough resources to be able to, provide these funding to the various projects or the call to actions that are required. What is GCF doing in order to address and ensure that, as everyone else and all these other member states are looking towards GCF, it will have the capacity and the ability to really deliver on the needs that the scientists have provided us and have shown that the financing is what is essential to realize these actions.
Okay, we'll try this one. Oh yeah, it's working. All right, thank you. Very good question. First and foremost, remember GCF is a partnership organization and it's also country driven. So we respond to country needs and we try and work on the basis of a country driven plans. And we're trying to work with countries to either help them realize their NDCs, their MAWAs, and national adaptation plans. So the first thing is to look at what is this that the countries aspire to achieve. So our ability to achieve is also dependent on what the countries themselves are set up to achieve or deliver. And what we have is we have several windows. So you have, like, for example, a readiness support facility, which seeks to support countries, yes, to and support certain institutions in terms of helping them come up with their own adaptation plans or climate investment plans, not just for GCF financing, but also for other financing, and help coordinate that so that then they're able to strategically use whatever resources they get more effectively to deliver on their climate ambitions. That is both mitigation and an adaptation aspect. So that's one aspect of it. And that also goes towards helping strengthen the institutions, local institutions, whether it's local direct accredited entities or their local, what you call the national designated authorities. So that's one part of it. And that's the idea, is that with that, then when we put in additional resources, and not just GCF, but other even bilateral donors, is that when resources are then channeled to countries, they are better deployed and more effectively can deliver on their set ambitions. So that's one part of it. The second aspect of it is, as an institution, we've set up, we've been streamlining and improving our systems so that we also improve the predictability of our processes, so that when you come to us, first and foremost, what exactly is it we're looking for. So for the different types of assistance, whether it's projects, we already have on our website our programming manual. We have, even for our readiness, we have a readiness guidebook. And we are also going ahead and having several webinars so that we are a bit more responsive to countries. We also have regional dialogues where we sort of go to the regions and have engagements so that we have a better sense of what's really going on at different levels. Remember, not all countries, not all regions are created equal. So we try and respond in that way. So again, we're not a perfect institution. I'm not going to kid out anybody here. We are learning and we are getting better as we go, but that's how we've positioned ourselves. And as you can see, to date, we've been able to deploy over $11 billion, which just speaks to the capacity of an institution that it's not very old. And the other thing is, because we also work with partners, the idea is also that then we don't have to set up too many systems, then duplicating what other people already can do better. So the idea then is, if you're working with the World Bank, or for example, if you're working with a local entity that better knows the local intricacies, we don't have to come back and start learning the same thing that everybody already knows. So by working with partners, then we are leveraging on their competencies, their expertise, their advantages, and ultimately then we are better in that way. So our partnership, which goes over 200 partners, across the globe, then means that then we are able to work with partners who know the different regions in different sectors and have already different expertise very quickly, can deploy that expertise a lot easier than if we had to do it by ourselves. So that's our advantage as the GCF.
So, hello, can you hear me? So, thank you so much for panelists and presenter. So, my name is Mein Sin Chun. I'm from Cambodia, Ministry of Economy and Finance. I've got two questions. So, what I can caught up with His Excellency from Mongolia is that like paying the money is easy, but how to use money efficiently is another important thing. But in my current situation, I mean, in Cambodian context, we are now in the process of like trying to get the fund from GCF. So may I know your experiences, like what challenges have you encountered during the stage that you are trying to get the fund from GCF, so that we can learn from your country experiences. Another one is about the adaptation fund that Emira, if it's not wrong, your name is Emira, right? The presenter talking about the adaptation fund is lower than the climate mitigation fund, right? If I'm not wrong. So, like, what should be the percentage of adaptation fund in comparison to mitigation fund? Because it has an implication for like our country as well. Like, what should the level of the fund it should be in compared to mitigation fund? So I've got two questions here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And the question from Cambodian delegate, if I understood correctly, how to get money from GCF means you have to develop very good project, of course. And but I know that GCF doesn't have any own interest. Only should be develop a very good project reflecting all country needs, and this is the country-driven exercise. But sometimes people think that very sophisticated science-based and so on. This is not. Should just in simple way reflect the real situation in the country and the local community needs and so on. And of course, all should be argumented based on science information and so on. It's a very simple approach. And what about adaptation fund? As you know, the GCF and adaptation fund are a little different. The adaptation fund has much less money, but in Mongolia we said big stone can be moved using very small stone, and even adaptation fund has very limited amount of money, but sometimes the adaptation fund projects could be very important contribution to make to the country's adaptation needs.
Thank you for your question. Before I answer, I just wanted to check whether you meant adaptation finance and mitigation finance rather than the adaptation fund. Adaptation finance, right? Okay. As I presented in the slide, we show that the IPCC reports estimate that, and this is not new, that adaptation finance is low, you know, is very low and is way below the required finance for adaptation. It is estimated that it has a share of around 6-7% of the tracked climate finance. I use the word tracked because there is also a challenge around tracking adaptation finance, and it has to do also with the negotiations here. I'm not going to go any further on that. So the share is very low. We also have estimated the needs, not in the summary for policymakers, but the big report from Working Group 2 on adaptation, impact and vulnerability shows that the needs for adaptation are estimated to be the annual needs for adaptation go at the range of 130 billion a year by 2030. So this is a figure that shows that there needs to be a lot of efforts from countries, including in here, to agree and move the agenda of the global goal on adaptation, which feeds into the climate on the finance goal, which is another negotiating stream for parties here in the COP27.
The last question.
Hi, everybody. I'm a French speaker. I don't know we have interpreter, or I try in my broken English.
You could try.
I try. Yeah. My name is Mbake Sek. I come from Senegal. I am the president of National Community Network, National Community for Protect Environment. In Senegal, in Africa, population grow up, climate crisis grow up, and small ground never grow up. 20 years ago, if you make a small ground, it's $50,000. And we have more problems. And people like me are training by Jeff. And we have more skill. Community have more needs. And the small grant stays the same step. We have COVID-19, we have Ukraine crisis, and many, many needs. Why small grant don't grow up? We need more money for community. Thank you very much. And sorry for my broken English.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, and small grants sometimes can trigger very big, very important key activities, and therefore small grants should be used very wisely. Sometimes even small grants can serve much bigger impact on big projects. The big money is, people can spoil. Thank you.
Well, you hear that from another country, so I guess it's different experience. Yeah. So you want to speak to the same? You want to answer?
Thank you. My name is Advera from Tanzania, and I would like, I have two issues to talk about. To add up on what my colleague has said, the issue is not the bad utilization of the fund. The issue is evaluation of the first fund that was provided. If it is efficiently used, why don't you provide another fund so that you can support the remaining activities in the society? I think maybe we should move from maybe the way we are providing this financing. You may even decide to use the P4R, which is very, very important. That means somebody can get more funds depending on how they deliver from the previous financing that was being provided. I just wanted to comment on that, because the issue is not the misuse of fund. The issue is how to evaluate the expenditure that has been provided to the country. I think we should look on the possibility on how we can have that particular consideration. The other thing I just want to find out from my sister here, she said from 2017, that's where GCF came in. I just want to find out what did they go through to make sure that they were registered, and how long it took, and also I want to find out how much so far you have been supported from GCF, and what is your plan from the available programs and for the future programs, and how do you see GCF supporting you in the future program? Thank you.
Okay, I will just clarify something. I think you're referring to the small grants from the Global Environment Facility. I cannot speak to that because I'm speaking from the Green Climate Fund, and that's a different window. And so I may not be able to really speak to the Global Environment Facility's small grant facility. The only thing I would say though is, I think the grant resources, as you said, I think they're granted with certain considerations, depending on what was the intention. And as you say, true, there could be graduation depending on either the availability of the resources to continue growing, but also, I guess, also whether they were meant to graduate to another level. I can't speak to that. For us, for the readiness grants, we have country allocations on an annual basis. But even that has a limit, because, and that is also a function of the resources that even as an institution we have. And I guess maybe that might also be applicable to GEF itself, right? Because we have a limited pool, so you may also have only so much that can go around, and you may not be able to continually grow it towards a different level. So maybe that's an issue, but I can't speak 100%. But Ezra, you may want to speak.
Thank you so much for your question. First, what we did was apply to the Adaptation Fund to get readiness support to help us develop a lot of policies, plans, and manuals. From that point, we were fast-tracked for accreditation through the Adaptation Fund in 2015. So that better positioned us to apply to become an accredited entity to the Green Climate Fund in 2017. So there was a quite a long process, but we had to put a number of systems and policies and plans in place to allow us to have the necessary structure and framework to serve as an accredited entity. We also had to familiarize ourselves with GCF policies, also strengthen ourselves as a national designated authority. So we also received readiness support from the Green Climate Fund to strengthen our NDA. We then applied for another readiness grant to develop our direct access, develop as a direct access entity. We then applied for another grant to support us in national adaptation planning, as well as strengthening our country program. As I mentioned in my talk earlier, we're on our 5th readiness. So we've consistently, I think the readiness available to countries is at a cap of 1 million. So we've consistently, since gaining accreditation, sought to strengthen our systems by applying for readiness support. And in that process, we're also developing project concepts and projects which we are pushing forward to the GCF. As mentioned, we received 2 projects fully funded, not fully funded, funded by the GCF. We've also leveraged our relationship with the GCF to access further funding from the Adaptation Fund and from the Global Environmental Facility. We've also used the policies, plans, and frameworks that we have in place to leverage further funding from other partners, such as the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development. We've engaged in some bilateral agreements. We've also engaged in technical assistance and partnerships with NDC Partnership and other implementing partners. So that has positioned us to develop a very robust project pipeline. And in the future, we do expect to have a more long-standing relationship with GCF. We got our first multi-year readiness program on the GCF approved, and that is serving almost like a template for other countries to apply.
Okay, and on that very happy note, I think we have to wrap this up. I think we've gone way over time. I want to thank you very much for all your attention. Please let's put our hands together for this very good panel. Thank you very much for your very good presentations, your inputs, your insights, and to the very good audience for their attention, their very insightful questions and comments. Thank you for your patience as well. Have a great evening. Thank you, everyone.